most of us are acting as immature lions because we have the symptoms of burnout, frustration, plateauing.
The 5 constraints are very simply arrogance, ignorance, fear, insecurity, and impatience.
Just imagine, friends, you're 22 years of age. How long ago was that? I mean, for me, that was 30 plus years ago now, it seems like. 22 years of age and you're homeless. Nowhere to lay your head. But you have a vision. You have a dream. You have a calling. You have an inspiration. You can see something perhaps that no one else can see. And before you know it, what seems like just a fleeting moment, time passed, and now you've built a 9-figure empire. Just within a period of a few decades. That's our guest today. Our guest has a powerful story. I actually reached out to Stephen because he and I met at an event, and right off the bat, I knew he was a brother. I also knew that he had a powerful testimony, but he also has a depth of wisdom that I, as a business owner, want to tap into. And friends, the more and more I started following Stephen, listening to his podcast, I got to tell you, friends, there is a depth of knowledge that each of us should be sitting on the edge of our seat today. Grab a pen and paper. There's going to be some truth bombs that can help you in your business serve our God and serve your calling to the fullest capacity. With that introduction, Stephen, man, thanks for joining me on the podcast today, brother.
Dude, so good to see you again, man.
Yeah.
It seems like the New Year's treating you well, which is awesome.
Man, it is. It is. I'm trying to catch up with you, though, dude. It's like I see this guy.
I don't know if I catch up with me, bro. I don't know if anybody wants to go through my journey to get to where I'm at. So, but hopefully there's some good news I can share with your folks.
Well, let's talk about the journey. 22 years of age, dude, homeless, all the way to a 9-figure company by the age of 50. Walk me through the highlights and the lows, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest thing to do is to help people understand that my childhood was largely robbed from me. I'd say robbed. Robbed is a strong word. I mean, it was God's plan all along, right? So 9 years old, taking care of my grandmother who got diagnosed with cancer. She was raising my little brother and I. So getting up at 5:36 a.m., learning to make any kind of meal that you can make out of hot dog, like water, milk, so hot dogs and oatmeal and macaroni and cheese. And then, getting us dressed, literally physically being her crutch, walking her around the house. I mean, this is the mid 80s. So at that time, the chemotherapy was probably as dangerous as the cancer itself. And unfortunately, about 2 years later, she passed away, and my parents came back into our lives and split us. My brother went to live with my mom in Florida. I went to go with my dad. Well, really stayed in the Carolinas, but in the little town called Fuquay-Varina, and immediately went to work. I remember, I think he picked me up on a Thursday, and I think on a Saturday morning, I was already on a job site carrying studs and moving things around. And that began my journey from, 12 years old, all the way through my early 20s, really. We went through a season where my dad had his own business. He was a framing contractor and was working for a man that would become my long-term mentor. I later learned he was kind of like my dad's father figure of sorts. My family on my dad's side just struggled with alcoholism off and on. My grandfather on my dad's side survived Pearl Harbor. So my guess is the alcoholism was a self-medicating methodology to deal with what we now know as PTSD, or what I like to call as PTS struggles. I don't like the D disorder part, but long story short, that was kind of the thing. My dad did really well for business for a little while, learned some very hard lessons, lost it all. We lost it all. I immediately went to work in the construction industry, almost full time, about 17 years old. My junior year of high school, dropped out.
What year would that have been? Is that roughly the late 80s or so, whenever that was happening?
My high school would have been late 93, early 94, as far as my high school journey around my junior year. And I had been held back in 5th grade when my grandmother passed away. So it was a little bit of a year gap there. But in the grand scheme of things, that I got tired of the lights getting cut off all the time, and, cold showers and all kinds of stuff. And I used to say that I was forced to. Now I say, no, I actually made this choice. I made the difficult decision to drop out of high school. I immediately went to work in the construction industry. My dad's longtime guy, Steve Myrick, old man Myrick, as I like to call him. And, over the course of my childhood, from like 12 to like 18, 19, 20 years old, he would pull me down with my dad's framing crew and and just speak life over me. Hey, this is what you need to do. Stay away from alcohol. This is how real estate works. By the way, this is how you flip equity. This is how you do this. And at that time, dude, I wish I had paid closer attention, because I think I missed nuggets along the way. They would say that it went in one ear and out the other. Thank God that most of it just came rushing back all at one time. But Yeah, he put me in business for myself with a siding company. And that first year and some change, I killed it. I made a lot of money really fast, never been trained to handle money, got very cocky, very arrogant, mainly because people in my life told me I wasn't going to be very much. And I find that a lot of entrepreneurs at some level are chasing validation, which gives them a different risk profile. They're willing to take risk and things of that nature. And, and this is long before I actually, became a bit more mature. And lo and behold, I made a bunch of money really fast and got lost in arrogance and pride and ignorance. And next thing you know, I went on a tumbling spell of losing it all, not related to drugs or alcohol specifically, just more of being hard-headed, not wanting to ask for help, heavily relying on guilt and shame. And, honestly, if you're coming from a very insecure place because you don't really know any better at the time, the first thing that you do is you keep telling people, oh, I got it figured out. And so when help does come, you turn it away. And a lot of us do that. Even I've done that, at $80 million in top line revenue, I've done that, so that was kind of like the early days in the story.
What changed it? What was the mindset that you had to go through that struggle? You talk about the mountaintop where you rose, you talk about the valley you went through, and then there's typically when you go through that valley of despair, there's a moment or something that we can like pinpoint back to that maybe it was a mentor, maybe it was this friend that you had. Yeah. They said something that now changed, flipped a switch in your mind. I'm just curious, what was that for you? Do you remember that point?
I do. His name is Jesus.
I love it. Tell me about it. Tell me about it, bud.
I'll tell you this. For about 5 years after my grandmother passed, well, probably longer than that, from the time my grandmother passed, I began the slow anger buildup, right? And by the time I entered the homeless area of life, they call it low vibe, right? You're living on guilt, shame, and condemnation. And lo and behold, I was showering at a World's Gym. It was the one thing that I had paid a year for in advance when I had money. So I was showering there. I remember locking eyes one time with myself. I'm like, dude, what the hell are you doing? You were literally getting mentored by, Steve Mark at that time his net worth was $30 or $40 million. I mean, it was, and we're talking about the 90s. Like he was very, very well off. He was a very good person. He was very diligent and kind of he could known to be a bit of a hard-head business guy. But he was incredibly generous. There was nothing for him to leave $1,000 tip at different restaurants in cash and walk out the door and not think anything about it. And I always kind of wanted to be like him, right? So I lock eyes with myself and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? About that time, my brother reaches out to me to clean a litter box for $50. I had gotten to the point where I really needed cash. And so I offered to do that. And the next thing you know, I'm meeting going one-on-one with the great one, as they say, which started off as me breaking a handle on a pooper scooper and snapping it off. It would take a long time to tell the entire story with imagery and detail, and it is online if people want to check it out. But let's just say I began yelling at a God I didn't believe in, and I uttered the words, if you're so blankety blank real, why don't you prove it? Let's just say I wasn't expecting a response. Something took my legs out from under me. I was literally on the bathroom floor, this mobile home that my brother was in at the time, my old one, and kind of pinned to the floor, and I was frozen. I was terrified. I was not expecting a response. And I just remembered this little whisper in my heart and basically said, are you willing to surrender? And I don't know about you, but if you're pinned to the floor, locked to the floor, and you're frozen in time, I mean, it was when I say it was quiet, like quiet is an understatement. Like it was, all I could hear was this whisper. I agreed, and the last little whisper said something along the nature of, okay, well, great, I can bless you. And sure enough, I got up off that floor completely different. I was reborn in an instant. My way in which my brain thought was radically changed. I became a very driven individual about that time. I became a voracious learner. I wanted to learn. I got a second chance that I didn't deserve, to get back on my dad's framing crew that then led me back in front of Steve. And then Steve gave me a second chance that I didn't deserve. He just told me, he said, I'm not buying you tools, equipment. I'm not running your back office for you. If you want this opportunity, you can have it. But you got to figure it out. So sure enough, over the weekend, my dad and I pulled the material out of the trash piles of the construction site and began building the tools and equipment I needed for Monday. And, God willing, I got a second chance, and that's the company I sold in 2023.
So from the second chance to selling a company 20-something years later, 25 years later, I know that journey, or that 2 decades plus, had extremely high highs and extremely low lows. When I listen to your podcast and read several of your posts out there, you often refer to, and sometimes you actually address owner dependency right off the bat. I'm just curious, coming off the floor, getting the second chances, launching a business, and reaching that first, let's call it glass ceiling at some point, you had to come to an epiphany where it wasn't about you anymore. It wasn't about your abilities or skill set. And that's when I see, Stephen, so many of our audience and so many of our listeners often reach. And reach that point to where they're maybe they're waving the white flag that you did in that particular story that you just illustrated. How did you move in your mindset to where it's not about you, it's about now decentralizing yourself so that you can build this 9-figure business?
Well, it's funny. It's taken me, 30 some years to learn one very, 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 very important truth. And if your listeners and your viewers get nothing else from this conversation, let this one sentence sink in. You can't scale dysfunction. And dysfunction shows up in a lot of different ways. Dysfunction will first show up inside of you, that then begins to create behavior patterns outside of you that then it will either lead you towards learning to delegate or resisting delegation, or learning to be a voracious learner or resisting learner. In fact, as part of that framework, one of the things I've been teaching folks recently is what I refer to as the 5 constraints. And they deal specifically with the leader. I'm not the first one to say, hey, your leadership is by far most likely your bottleneck in your business or your career. John Maxwell's been saying that for 50 years, right? The difference is it became very tangibly true because as I would try to scale myself, my business, when I ignored me and the things that created and motivated me to take action or not take action, then everything that overflowed out of me was inconsistent, unstable, and largely incompatible with the people I was trying to bring on. So I'll say it this way. I'll break down the 5 constraints for you super fast. First of all, you need to understand that national statistics tell you that businesses fail for lack of sales, lack of leadership, lack of market fit, poor penetration. Like there's all these different external reasons, right? The real reason businesses fail and struggle and entrepreneurs scale to struggle, the vast majority of entrepreneurs that get to stay in business never break through the 7-figure first ceiling. Now, you mentioned earlier, hey, they go from 0 to 500K, 500K to $1 million, $1 million to 7, 7 to 10, so on and so forth. And at every stage of the level, if you are a quality leader, you are constantly being forced to die to yourself. So at some point in time, you realize that you need people in order to participate in the marketplace in an impactful way. So those entrepreneurs that I see, and I see this a lot, I've looked at buying businesses or putting equity and capital into businesses. And so many times when I'm sitting down, I'm actually evaluating the founder, the owner, the CEO, if you will. And most of them haven't made the jump from a founder to a CEO. Okay. Founders are very self-motivated. They're typically largely anchored by these 5 constraints I'm going to share with you, where CEOs are very strategic and data-driven business people. Okay. And the vast majority of entrepreneurs can't make the jump from one to the other, all right? I've been very fortunate that God has put me in a position to continue to learn from people that allow me to make the jump from one to the other. I would say I'm actually a qualified CEO now. I can look at data, I can read P&Ls, I can read cash flow forecast, I can look at a marketing plan, I can look at a sales team, I can look at my director of operations. And because I've failed so many times at each of those levels, I can see things that they couldn't see. Okay. But in order to do that, you have to be able to look at yourself and say, hey, this could be better. And as I break down the 5 constraints, because this is going to resonate with you, let's just say it this way. The 5 constraints are very simply arrogance, ignorance, fear, insecurity, and impatience.
Say that one more time for me, Stephen.
Arrogance, ignorance, impatience, fear, and insecurity. Arrogance is what I did before I became homeless, which is I know everything I need to know. I can figure it out on my own, or I'm so living on my past successes that I don't think a downturn or something is around the corner. So you don't prepare for it, right? You're living outside of the margin of error, basically. Okay. Ignorance is basically saying it's a form of saying I don't know what I need to know and I'm not willing to learn it, or I don't know what I need to know and I'm not willing to search for it. Okay. Impatience. This is funny. You'll get a kick out of this. So last time I was on a stage, towards the tail end of last year, I'm about to go on the Create conference this year. One of the things I did that I've been doing for fun, and now people are going to be in the audience and be like, okay, now I know exactly what he's doing. So now I'm probably not going to participate. So I'm going to give away my little bit of secret, but I say, by show of hands, How many of you think think you should be further ahead than you actually are? And without fail, 100% of the hands go up. The trick is because of that, we're always operating in patience rather than operating in presence. If you can't be present in the moment, you can't make quality decisions for the future. Instead, what we do is we chase the future, thinking that presence or thinking that potential is going to show up in and of itself, rather than actually activating the things that need to change or things that need to shift right now to prepare a greater way forward. Then we look at fear and insecurity. I mean, fear by definition is fear of success, fear of failure, fear of admitting when you're wrong, fear of going home to your spouse. I'm like, hey, I made a bad decision today. Like, we feel like we have to be a superhero constantly, right? Insecurity is where most entrepreneurs actually operate from. So at any given moment, you could be operating from all five, a few of them, or even one of them. And they become the behavioral pattern that creates the roadblock, that creates the decision-making, or that influences your decision-making in such a way that it's not as fruitful as it could be. So if you look at arrogance, the opposite of arrogance is redefined humility. The opposite of ignorance is teachability. The opposite of impatience is presence. The opposite of fear is intentional faith, meaning it's a pursuit of faith. It's a pursuit of truth. It's a pursuit in trust. And the opposite of insecurity is compounded confidence over time. So to give you that's kind of like my big way in which I can tell you by definition, every entrepreneur I've ever seen and worked with, whether it be they just made their first 100,000, or even some of my clients that are 9 and 10 figure clients that I've had in the past, all of them have battled with all five of them, or many of them, or at least one of them at any given moment. That is the reason you cannot scale dysfunction.
It's fascinating to me in the sense I've never heard anybody break it down in 5 different elements. In my own life, my Achilles is hubris, pride. You might use that as arrogance. It's just an unbelievable pride, because what I see, and I think you would recognize this, Stephen, I think you may agree with this, is that a lot of times entrepreneurs, they are extremely capable people, very gifted, tenacious. I mean, we're willing to charge hell with a water pistol if we have to. I mean, that's who we are, right? And because we see our goal, but because of all the, as you said, the failures and the abuse and the letdown and the struggles and everything that we face, we get to a certain point, we look back and say, look at what I've done. I'm guilty. This is Justin Goodbread speaking, right? We look at what I've done versus look at what God's allowed me to do, or something of that nature, framing it in a biblical perspective. I'm curious though, whenever you break out these 5 areas, how might I, as a business owner, diagnose which one of those areas I'm dealing with, or am I even capable of diagnosing? Is it somebody that I need to have somebody from the outside speaking into my life? Like Solomon says, in a multitude of counselors, there is safety. Or is it something that I can be ever so self-aware on that I can self-diagnose?
Yeah. Well, I think the easy answer to that question is most of us can't self-diagnose it, which is why it keeps happening. We're too close to our identity or the perception of our identity. So inevitably what happens is God will put mentors and things like that in your space, but then you still have to choose to activate. I can't tell me how many times God put a mentor in front of me and I pushed the mentor away. You're doing it at a subconscious level because there's a fear inside of you, something that you don't want to face. And I would say it this way. We actually have a leadership tool for this very reason. It's you can go to stephenscoggins.com/leader, and it takes about 10 minutes, but it's very comprehensive. And it tells you about leadership style specifically. And the reason I did that was because I had to personally also combat that to develop a 9-figure organization and learn how to hopefully continue to do the same thing repeatedly, right? But then you also have to figure out, what is the purpose of the company? God gives believers, business leaders, I believe, the ability to create wealth and steward wealth because he wants us to create overflow. I'll give you an example. Sean Bowles is a good friend of mine. He did a study, I think it was 2019, just before COVID. Maybe it was a little earlier than that. It was a Harris poll, and it said that 70% of the people in the population were living unfulfilled, anxious, desperate, and the reason is because they're living someone else's life. They're not living the congruent life that God gave them to live in the first place. We got doctors trying to be painters and painters trying to be doctors, entrepreneurs trying to do this and entrepreneurs trying to do that. But the other thing that he mentioned in that same exact thing was that the actual annual need to solve the vast majority of the world's population, the foster care system, housing and food and all this kind of stuff, is about $7 trillion. There's about $37 trillion in the hands of entrepreneurs that are faith-based believers. $37 trillion. But yet, many of us, because of our insecurities, our pride, our ego, our arrogance, our impatience, our fear, all these kind of things, is we feel like we have to go out and get more for ourselves so we can show other people that we matter. Not realizing that the only person you ever feel like you need to matter to is a person staring back at you in the mirror. Because God already put you on this earth well before you had the capacity to earn or anything, and he already gave you incarnated value, right? So if you just look at that dynamic for a second, then you have to say, okay, well, if you can't scale dysfunction, well, what do you need to do? Well, what you need to do is you need to scale alignment. Well, how do you move from dysfunction to alignment? And this is where my grandfather comes into play. I was 2016, just before he passed away. I was about to start this author, speaker, journey, thought leader, whatever you want to call this new niche, right? Of trying to add value to the world. And I said, do you think I can do that? And he said, well, I think so. I know a construction guy that made a worldwide impact, but he followed a simple framework. I'm like, really? Who? Yeah, his name is Jesus. I was like, all right, you got me. All right. I fell right into that one, right? He said, son, if you're going to do this successfully, then you're going to learn to have to become one part lion and one part lamb. And what he meant by that, and it took me, dude, I've been noodling on that for a decade now, right? So much so that it's become like the anchor point of everything that I'm doing from 2026 moving forward. And what that means is, let's just call it like it is. All right, so most people are familiar with King David. Most people are familiar with King Saul. Most people are familiar with the basic story of King David and King Saul, right? The cool thing is God gives us constant contrast. He lets us see what it looks like to have excellence done well, and he also gives us insight into excellence not done well. So when I say excellence, I mean you're just heading down the wrong path. If you take what the lion stands for, okay, in its immaturity, it's controlling, dominant, it's unable to let go. It's the spirit of control. In maturity, it's bold and courageous. It's a leader that goes first. On the lamb side, if you're an immature lamb, if you will, and people it's like a pendulum. People vacillate back and forth until you become aware of these basic principles. When you take the lamb side and you look at the immaturity side, you're self-abandoning, people-pleasing, so therefore you get bowled over all the time and you don't take the actions that you need to take because you think you're being of service to everybody else, not realizing what you're really doing is abandoning yourself, okay? However, a lamb in maturity has the ability to hold steady boundaries, but also be compassionate, empathetic. So if you're leading a team, let's play this out in the workplace for a second. Let's say you're leading a management team. And you feel like you have to go into every meeting and you're the person that has to control every outcome, you're the person that has to have every idea, then you're actually operating as an immature lion. As opposed to a leader who can come in grounded, secure, and sit down and say, all right, as we talked about earlier, these were our 3 objectives. Guys, tell me what you see. Literally be the last person to speak, not the first one to speak. Encourage your team to speak up, right? And let's say that same meeting, the team has a little more unity, right? And because you can't scale a business without team unity. There's no such thing as a $100 million company as a one person operation. It doesn't happen. You need team, right? Let's say you step out of that meeting and your COO for the first time is going through a marital challenge or their child is sick or something like that. So their productivity is going to drop for a season, right? How do you address it? Do you come down on them guilt, shame, and condemnation, or do you sit down with them long enough to have a conversation like Jesus with the woman at the well and just say, help me understand where you're at? Okay, so let's get some support networks in place, right? So you can actually continue to uplift and encourage that team member, and that team member then has more buy-in because you took the time to care. There's also, let's say that your director of operations, I'm just using random titles, right, comes up, and they've just been underperforming. They've got their most important number. They've got the 3 drivers that drive it. They're not hitting their metrics. They're not even trying to hit their metrics. Well, they need a kick in the butt, right, in a professional manner, right? So inevitably what happens is so much of quality leadership is designed to be mature leadership through becoming one part lion and one part lamb. And out of that comes quality stewardship. And out of quality stewardship comes acceleration. Most of us won't stop long enough in order to be part of something. Like we're so much in a rush, like we're not paying any attention. And as a result, you lose presence. You become impatient. You make foolish decisions. Those foolish decisions cause 10 problems when they should have solved 1. So then you're constantly putting out fires over and over and over again.
I'm fascinated with the one part lion, one part lamb. And for this reason, Stephen, I was homeschooled most of my life. And so my mom taught me how to read, but read super fast. So I've read a book a week now for 30 years. And back when before Emily and I, my wife and I were ever met each other, I was given this book called A Man of Steel and Velvet. That we have to be steel sometimes and velvet other times. But it was talking about it from a marital standpoint, or how a father, whenever my daughter would come to me, I can't be that steel person. I need to be to my son sometimes. I got to be velvet and moving. I've never heard or thought about that dichotomy in light of business. But as you were talking about this, I can't help but think about the people specifically listening to this podcast of where they're stuck at in this self-diagnosis as you're listening to what Stephen's saying, this lion and lamb, the dichotomy between the two of those. I have to believe, Stephen, and maybe I'm wrong, please push back on me if I am. I have to believe that most of us are acting as immature lions because we have the symptoms of burnout, frustration, plateauing, like everything relies upon us versus the both sides of the coin. I remember hearing somebody say, have you ever seen a one-sided pancake? No, it doesn't happen, right? Instead of living on both sides of that, being both the lion and the lamb. I'm curious, is that what you see through your lens as you're coaching the people you have the privilege to serve, that they're defaulted as an entrepreneur spirit onto the lion side more than the lamb side?
It literally could be 50-50. And here's what I mean by that. There's obviously a lot of gritty, tenacious entrepreneurs and business leaders that tend to be more on the lion side. There's also a great deal of business leaders and entrepreneurs that because they start with the heart of service and they start with the love of people, that when they began to bring people on, they immediately they get stuck in people pleasing rather than making difficult decisions that need to move the ball forward. So I'll give you an example. A lot of this you can kind of look at some of this in terms of personality styles for those who are familiar with DISC and stuff like that. So you got your D's and the I's. Those are more lion oriented in many respects. I mean, there's qualities. And you got your S's and your C's. They tend to be more on the lamb side, like not wanting to take rapid action, right? Where D's and lions are like, well, I'm going to take action like now, right? And on the surface, you would think because here's how confirmation bias works. So when you see all lions, that typically means that you are a lion. You're spending a lot of time in lion, right? However, if you're on the lamb side, you see a lot of lamb activity. Right. And what I'm trying to help people understand is in order to be a whole leader, like I was doing a conference last year. It's called FounderCon. A good friend of mine, Tamara Andrus, faith-based business conference, 3-day conference. And it was really interesting because I was sharing this concept. I did a deep dive into David and Saul and how they contrasted and things of that nature. Saul, for example, needed to be liked. Like he needed to be liked. He didn't do exactly what God told him to do. He didn't make the sacrifices he was supposed to make, when on this one specific battle where the anointing is removed and given to David, because he's like, well, the people wanted, the people needed, the people said, right? And then David's like, no, what God said. Right. So when you start getting into a man or woman after God's own heart, that's what we're looking for. Is we're looking for radical obedience. But in the grand scheme of things, as I began telling the story, I went through a really hard season. And I'll tell you guys publicly that you would think, okay, you become financially successful. You can travel. You can do all the things that you think you're pursuing right now. All the reasons that you think you're doing it. I want to have this. I want to have that. I want to provide for my family at this level and all this kind of stuff. You'll get it. You'll realize very quickly it's completely empty, which is where the desire to steward comes from. Stewardship comes after selfishness. You can't become a steward until you release selfishness, and then you start wanting to lead for the sake of being a great leader. The same FounderCon event, for the first time in my life, because I went through this, it was just like my heart was broken, open up. I had everything that you could think of that you would want, and here I am at the top of a mountain on a house in Utah, empty by myself, and I'm like, I'm completely unhappy. And I go through this journey, so much so that at this event, I stand up on stage and I'm sharing this concept in detail, which is it's difficult to do on a podcast, but doing it on stage. And I finally, out of nowhere, I just put my hand over my heart and go, I am whole. Most of us feel fragmented. It's fragmentation that creates burnout, anxiety, overwhelm. The quickest way out of burnout, overwhelm, and anxiety is actually presence. What did Jesus do before he made major decisions or took major action? What did David do before he made major decision or major actions? When you look at scripture throughout the Bible, people that are more in attunement with removing fragmentation through alignment do one thing every single day. They start their day with presence. One of the most powerful things that I recommend leaders do right now, this is an action step anyone watching or listening can take tomorrow morning. Get up, 5, 4, whatever. Get up 30 minutes before you normally do. Grab a piece of paper, a notebook, and a pen. The top of the left-hand side of the page, I want you to write nothing but what I hear you say is. And then write today's date. And then be quiet, be still, and listen. The vast majority of the problems that you want to have solved right now, God has been trying to give you the answers for repeatedly over and over and over again, but you're so wrapped up in chaos because chaos feels more comfortable than stability that you pursue or create chaos. If you struggle with those 5 constraints, by definition, you enjoy chaos. You may tell yourself you don't. You may say, well, God, one day I want to be stable. I want to be at peace. I want my business to run without me. I want to make sure that I'm present at the football games, and I'm tired of being guilty when I'm at work and trying to be, and then turn right around and be guilty when I'm at home. Like, until you get to the place where you can be still and just listen, you're going to keep repeating that same cycle. Because from the time that you realize that chaos is happening and you begin to pursue stability, like security, like safety, real safety, internal safety, to the time you experience is about a 6-month window. And that 6-month window is very uncomfortable because your nervous system, your body, your soul is learning a new way. David's in the field playing the harp. David's in the field praying. David's in the field writing the Psalms long before he ever picked up a sword. So when he picked up a sword, the sword was effective.
As I'm listening to you, Steve, in my own life, and I think you would, most people who've exited companies as founders, I think experience this at some point. I've started and sold 7 companies at this point, or started and sold 6, had a 7th exit here. Just finished up the last earnout this last week. And about 2 years ago, dude, I'm sitting at home doing what I do during the Christmas holiday, which is reload all the ammo I shot during the year. I'm a country boy. So I'm reloading ammo and I'm listening to podcasts. And we have our buddy Roy on a podcast. I'm listening to podcasts where you and he did together. I'm listening to these podcasts. I'm loading ammo. And it hit me in that moment that I could not say. I'm going to use your words. I didn't say it quite this way. I couldn't say I am whole. I'd been spending all my energy building this company and building leadership and empowering a team and putting others, that now it sat back and it was quiet. As a dad, as a husband, not really my identity wasn't suffering. I already dealt with my identity at that point, but it was like, what now? What now? And it wasn't, I've done meditation. I do my morning devotions every morning. I've been doing that for years. And it was much deeper than that. It was, Justin, you've got to take everything I've equipped you for, everything I've been equipping you for, and now apply it in the workplace. And as I'm listening to you speak even now, I have to believe there was some point in your life, perhaps like it was in mine, where all of the molding of that quiet time in the pasture as David was doing before he picked the sword up, all of that came to a certain point where it's like, I now have to proclaim this externally, unapologetically, without any pretense and without any animosity, but it's like, this is what I believe because I've seen it in my life. I'm curious, as you're bringing the lion and the lamb to this point of this wholeness, what was that like in your life whenever it wasn't more money or more prestige or more influence? It was, I'm now coming into complete alignment with God. I'm curious of what that moment was in your life, because we're talking about what the results thereof came about. I want to bring that out afterwards, but I'm just curious about that particular moment for you.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll tell your audience that all of anxiousness comes from striving. The moment you remove striving, lean into surrender, and just become. So there's doing and there's being. Most of us will spend our entire entrepreneurship and journey doing. And because we're always doing, we never can just be or become the being. And so much of what God wants leaders to become is the embodiment of who He is. If you have the embodiment of who He is, by definition, you are now a being. And as you're a being, because you're now being and not necessarily doing, what happens is now you create overflow. Your energetic presence, your frequency, if you will. And I know I'm using a lot of words that you wouldn't hear in Christianese, whatever, but I can't articulate it any other way. It's why your soul has a frequency. It has a resonance. That's why you can walk into a room and you feel like you can walk and man, I got to meet that person. I got to meet that person. This energetic, spirit of gratitude, if you will. So how did I become aware of that? I became aware of that when I realized that all the striving and all the doing became all the having, and all the having was empty. I'm gonna give you 2 snippets. This hit me like a ton of bricks, by the way. So I'll share this. And I share this with the audience as a point of reference, as a starting point to become one part lion and one part lamb. Become the integrated leader, as I would say. requires alignment, which requires truth. It requires to facing parts of yourself that you want to push away, for example. But the first like really time that I can remember this is I was having a divorce I didn't ask for, I didn't want. I largely because there's a lot of different reasons, health issues and some other stuff in the past. But one of those reasons was I was always working. So I go have lunch with my son, Tyler, at the time. He's the oldest. He's now a teacher and some other cool stuff. But we announced this to the kids. And these kids aren't biologically mine, but I spent a decade raising them. So they're my boys. Like they come up here for Christmas and the whole deal. Like we're super close. Tyler made a point, say, can you come, would you come have dinner with me? It's like a brunch kind of thing. So I went up to Campbell University, where he was at high school at the time, or not high school, college at the time. Went to this little Mexican joint, started dipping like the chips in the guacamole, just, thinking I'm going to console him, right? I'm going to somehow empower him and educate him, make him feel better about the decisions that were being made and whatever. Funny enough, he actually said two things. First of all, he said, you lasted longer than I thought you would, which I thought was kind of funny. But the second thing he said was the most important thing. It literally changed my life. In fact, there'll be an entire chapter on this one principle in the new book in July or the midsummer. And he said, if there's one thing you could do better as a dad, as a husband, as a leader, just one thing. He said, if you could learn to be more present when you're present, it would mean all the world to us. So many times we as leaders, we feel like by providing an exorbitant lifestyle of sorts, that we are somehow being what our family requires us to be. What I've discovered is that's not true. What your family requires of you is nothing more than quality time. It's time with the phone off, the computer away, locking eyes, having deep conversations. That's the developmental time. The reason I say that is if you're not able to do that right now in this moment, then by definition, you're out of alignment. Alignment starts with understanding that the things in your life that really mean something to you require the focus of which they mean something to you. That began a whole journey for me, like a whole journey of awareness, a whole journey of self-discovery. Why was I so aggressive in my pursuit of striving and obtaining and all these types of things? A lot of it, there's a lot of layers there, but one of the layers that I discovered was when I was about 15, 16 years old was when my dad lost his business, right? It's like that that's like when it started, right? And you start losing bits and pieces along the way. My dad comes to me crying and he looks me in the eyes and he said, don't ever forget that Scoggins don't get ahead, they get by. And I spent my entire life trying to prove that not to be the case. And some reason in my spirit, it didn't feel aligned, didn't feel truthful. Now, granted, my father was trying to teach me how to love. He thought he was loving me. Like he legitimately. So how many of us are operating from limiting beliefs that were cast on us or that we picked up along the way, and our subconscious is just trying to prove ourselves? You mentioned Rory. He and I have had the pleasure of doing a couple of different podcasts together. But about 5 years ago, this is back during COVID, I had this epiphany. Rory asked me something about, hey, how'd you, I forgot how we got into it. You can still find it with their original podcast. But one of the things that he mentioned that came out of my mouth was like, Rory, all this time I've been trying to feel like am I worthy of a voice? Am I worthy? Which means by definition, I grew up in a season of not feeling seen, heard, valued, and appreciated. And so what do? You become louder, you become smarter, you grind harder, you become the perfectionist. Like you just get into overperforming mode, right? The tricky part is when you become adult, overperforming actually repels the very things that you want in your life because you're pursuing, striving, going. And here's the crazy part. Because you're that way, you can't see your team the right way. You can't see your family that right. You can't see yourself the right way. You can't see your systems the right way, your processes. You can't see the things that are bottlenecking your business because you're still avoiding you. Once you stop avoiding you and you start doing the work, all of a sudden these things that you were avoiding surface and you can see them clearly and you're like, oh, if this, then that. If I want that to happen, then that needs to happen. If I want this to happen, if that needs to happen. Oh, if this happened and it wasn't what I wanted, this needs to happen next. But you can't do that until you become the highest version and grounded version of yourself. So I would say that probably I know it was a long-winded answer, but my son Tyler helped me fully appreciate what it means, what he was looking for. He didn't want another trip to Hawaii. He didn't want a sports car. He wanted his dad.
Man, that hits me in my heart because same thing happened to me. Not exactly in the same context, but my son Justice and I are sitting in a tree stand one day, Stephen, and we've been looking for this buck, his buck. We call it Justice's buck. And I'm with him in the tree stand, but you know the story. I'm on my phone. Now, I've hunted 45 years, dude. I know how to hunt. And he's beside me, and he goes, Dad, there's the buck. That deer was less than 10 yards from us. I'm the guy who can see him 100 yards away through the woods. I can see him before anybody else can. I was not there, so much so that that deer was there. And he looked at me, he goes, "Are you with me, Dad?" In that moment. Fast forward to the end of the year, and you'll hear a story a little bit more in personal at a different time for time's sake. Our audience has heard this, but during COVID, we didn't think my wife was going to be here. And thank God she is today. But we had the conversation with our kids, and Mom's not coming home. She's done. She's going to meet Jesus. And after a particular surgery, she looked at me and she said, "Justin, what's another $1 million going to do for me?" Because just like your story, I'm striving, trying to prove that no one outworks a Goodbread. That statement that my dad made my entire life. I'm doing the very best he could to disciple us. And I couldn't answer her question of what's another $1 million going to do for us. My coach then said, "Justin, if you had unlimited time, unlimited resources, what would you do tomorrow that's not doing today?" All that's happening in the same time period, perhaps of 6 or 7 months, perhaps like you're going through. If I fast forward now, I want to bring us to my last question I have for you, because it was something that I struggle with in my own person. I was born and raised in church, man. The day I was born, the pastor was there at the hospital. I'm the kid who was raised in church, who had memorized the Bible. The Bible is our guidebook for faith and practice. We're going to apply this, memorize the scripture, study the scripture. Ultimately, by the time I'm in my mid-20s, I'm the Pharisee of Pharisees, dude. I'm like Paul. I'm a who I am chief. That's me. And I began living my faith out within my small company, occasionally speaking to it in the microphone, sold the companies, and then I was told that I couldn't do that because of the corporate banner over the top of me. And I watched my, quote, following, my audience dwindle away. And then during the same quiet time that I'm sitting here reflecting as I'm loading ammo, listening on this podcast, it's almost as if I didn't have the same experience perhaps that you had, but I had this experience that said, "Justin, when are you going to speak? When are you going to unapologetically go proclaim me through you?" Stephen, that was I could take you to the exact place. I could tell you, I could show you all the details, much like you did earlier. And I'm curious of what is driving you. To me, well, the way I speak now publicly, the way I speak when I'm on stage, even my writings and everything I do now, I put a flavor of who I am, which is scripture, in underneath it every time. And what I'm watching is this, it's magnified. It's just like God's taking it. He's helping people. I'm getting text messages. I'm watching influence. It's like, wow, Lord, don't you just know I'm a country boy born and raised on a dirt road? Man, I'm not that smart. I'm just an old country boy. And he's just doing some things. So I'm curious because in your world, as I look at Stephen Scoggins on stage, in your writings, I can't wait to read your new book that's coming out this year. But I look at you, you are bold. You're a bold in the sense of, here is who I am. I'm going to put it out there, not in a judgmental way, but in a way that hopefully I reflect Christ. I'm curious, was it the conversation with your son that led to that? Or is it something that happened as a result of that conversation that brought you to the Stephen Scoggins that we see today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As you've been kind of setting that up, I've been trying to think through a little bit because I felt like that's where you were going with it. I would say it this way. The greatest invitation to Christ you will ever be is simply embodying who he is on a daily basis. I don't need to be on a tree stump or out in the public streets and you're going to hell if you don't do this or whatever. I feel like the world has had a lot of that. And that's why you're seeing a lot of folks that they've walked away from faith because they can't live up to the expectations of man. So as a result, what happens is the control of mankind becomes the barometer of which God is, and God is not remotely close to how man operates. In fact, when I look at Jesus's life, he did the opposite of the vast majority of what's taught on a regular basis in modern day, and I even hate to say this word, Christianity. It's one of the reasons why I refer to myself as a disciple, because I want to model and embody whatever Jesus said and did. Jesus was the barometer, is the barometer, and as a result, God sent Jesus here, or incarnated himself within Jesus here, to be the barometer, to say, hey, this is your benchmark. This is what to, if you're going to put effort towards, be this. I say all that to say that in order to be truly magnetic, you have to be truly authentic. We're on a podcast where clearly it's comfortable for me to talk about Jesus. Knew that going into it. You and I both love Jesus. You know, it's a good thing. We both want to do good in the world. We want to help people. We want to embody Jesus to the best of our ability. I go on a lot of podcasts that aren't necessarily Jesus friendly, and that's okay, because I show up and I try to exude love. I try to exude boldness and courage. I try to be compassionate when needed. I try to offer understanding. God told me a long time ago that he shared the story with the woman at the well for a reason. Jesus went to a place he wasn't supposed to go to, beside a well he's not really technically supposed to be at, talking to a woman he's not supposed to be talking to, and he didn't condemn, and he didn't shame, and he didn't hurt. Instead, he invited her into a conversation. That invitation is what led her to go run back into town and tell the entire town about the man. Come meet a man. And so what I decided to do a long time ago is I don't get involved in judgment and condemnation of any kind. That's beyond my pay grade. I'm not going to tell someone that their sin is greater than mine, or that's self-righteousness. That makes the person saying it feel good, but it harms other people in the process. Instead, I'm going to own up to when I make mistakes. I'm going to invite people into conversations. If I feel a nudge to share more, I share more. If I don't feel a nudge to share more, I don't share more. But I'm going to be me. I'm going to be the fullness of me. I've busted my butt to go through a great deal of turmoil and things of that nature to learn all of these lessons. And I can tie every single lesson that I have ever learned in my life back to an attribute of Jesus without fail and without problem. That doesn't mean that I use Jesus language constantly in order to articulate a certain point. And I do that because I want to be a conduit of invitation. In fact, I'll share this with you. We just had our team meeting. We have a major launch starting basically in, call it February, really. Like, we spent the last 3 years building this massive machine, if you will, to serve people at scale. And I invited someone brand spanking new to the team that I think is going to kill it and crush it. It's going to be one of our client concierges. He's an awesome guy. But he is like sold out, on fire. Like, he is Jesus through and through. He's the guy that would get on a tree stump and right? Which is great. That's the wiring. That's the lane God put in him. So we got to talk, and he's like, well, I'm curious, how come we're not more like abruptly faith forward? And I told him, I said, look, bro, I'm a bridge. I'm not going to be part of the machine that makes the mistake of pushing people away, requiring people to be something that it takes time to become. So many times we want people to make instantaneous changes and be these radical. Dude, it takes time. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion around, like, we'll take sexuality, for example. Okay, big item, right? Bible has its very clear infrastructure. The world has its clear infrastructure. Here's what God shared with me one time. The Holy Spirit told me, he said, I go to the place of the person's greatest need first. And it may not even be attached to sexuality at that time. It might be some generational wound that has to be worked on to get the vibrance pulled out of them. So again, I intentionally have decided to be a constant invitation, but also be authentically me. And by definition, that allows me to broadcast the best. I use phrasing that this would be helpful to a lot of folks. I learned this from Sean Bowles, a good friend of mine. He said, just borrow my faith for just a minute. You don't have to believe like I believe. Just borrow my faith for just a minute, just so you can understand the principle. And lo and behold, that same concept. I remember we were in this car going to a team dinner. We had another team member that had just been around me for the last year who had died to faith, but now reawakened to her own faith just because I just was me. So what if we, rather than try to tell people who they need to be, what if we were just authentically ourselves and let God do the rest? I don't know if that answers the question. That's just my heart.
It does. Stephen, you and I could talk all day, and we will in the near future, friend, but we're rushing out of time. So, friends, let me point you in a direction here. Stephen has an unbelievable podcast, Built with Stephen Scoggins. It's, I think, over 50 million views on this thing right now. It's a powerful podcast. He has some of the best guests, and you can hear his wisdom right now. This is a man that you've been listening to, as we said in the introduction, who started from some might say nothing. I would just say homeless, because there's still something there, but started from the foundations. You can hear his heartache. You can also hear his wisdom he's been talking to us today. I would challenge you, number one, to take a listen to his podcast. So, friends, we'll have a link to all of his social media stuff inside the show notes below. Take a look and follow Stephen. I'm telling you, his Instagram is one of the few people that I consistently look for whenever the feed does not automatically populate. That's how much I've enjoyed him in the last 6 months of my own life. On top of that, he's got a powerful book coming out. We highlight a little bit, and Stephen, as the book comes out, we'll have to have you back on the show to talk about it a little bit more in earnest as that approaches. He's got a powerful book coming out that talks about the delta between the lion and the lamb, the dichotomy, the arrangement here. Man, it's going to be a powerful book for us as business owners. He does have a coaching program, friends. For those of you who are looking for somebody with his temperament, his skill set, take a look at it. We'll put a link to the show notes to his coaching program. But more than anything, I think you just heard from a business owner who we might call a brother, who has a heart that has been molded through good times and hard times, as we all would say. And if you can allow people like Stephen to influence your life as a business owner and stay molded to what God has designed you for, I love his word alignment walking in alignment with the assignment God's giving you. That dream, that calling, that vision, that destination that you see. I know you can see it out there, else you wouldn't be fighting the fight every single day. You see it. You need men and women like Stephen here in your life, in your corner, speaking into it. So Stephen, man, thank you so much, dude. Thank you so much for coming and sharing the wisdom, dude.
It's such an honor to spend time with you, and I really appreciate the invitation. I can't wait to do it again.
Absolutely. Friends, take a look in the show notes. All of Stephen's contact information, everything's there. And until next time, y'all go out and make it a great day.